Welcome, everyone. Um, this is a discussion on turning roadmaps into reality, digital services for livestock methane reduction in low and middle income countries, hosted by LD4D, which is the Livestock Data for Decisions Network, and CCAC, which is the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, a UNEP convened initiative. I'm Vanessa Madu, Communications and Knowledge Exchange Specialist for SEBI Livestock, which is the Center for Supporting Evidence-Based Interventions in Livestock. SEBI Livestock facilitates LD4D. So some technical guidance before we get started. We are recording this meeting and we will publish the recording to our YouTube channel afterwards and send a link to everyone who registered. Please use the chat anytime throughout the webinar to post your questions and comments. We have asked our speakers and solutions group members to try to address these throughout the meeting and during dedicated question and answer sessions later. So today's agenda, we have an exciting session today. We will first get a tour of the roadmap by some of our authors. Then we will have two panel discussions focused on policy and investment. We'll end with some next steps to explore how to put the roadmap into action. So now I will hand over to Anna Miranda, LD4D Development Manager, and Greg Kohler, Agriculture Expert at CCAC, to introduce the roadmap.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to start by giving a very brief overview of the initiative. So the Solutions Group are an initiative that LD4D has been piloting since last year. It is a way for us to mobilize our network to produce concrete outputs. They bring together a wide range of experts to tackle data and evidence challenges. This group was convened specifically by CCAC and LD4D for the investment roadmap. So the presentation today, the investment roadmap was produced by this group. Some of our group members are here today. They will be participating in the panel or they will be presenting. They're also in the audience. So members, if you want to say hello in the chat, that would be great. Next slide, please, Vanessa. So here are all the organizations that participated in the group. As you can see, we have a wide range. We have representation from government, civil society, academia, multilaterals. This group came together both online and in person. We had a few online sessions to scope out the roadmap and the guidance. And then we convened everyone in person in a workshop in Bonn in June, which was hosted by GIZ, to develop the content of the roadmap. It was a very collaborative effort, and we are very happy to present the roadmap to you today. I'm going to hand over to Greg now to give you a bit of a background on the roadmap. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Could you go to the next slide, please? So just to give a little bit of context about how this topic emerged and how we decided to start this partnership with Livestock Data for Decisions on digital solutions for livestock. The CCAC is, as Vanessa already mentioned, a UNEP convened initiative that was founded in 2012 and brought together the governments of Bangladesh, Canada, Ghana, Mexico, Sweden, and the US. Since then, it's grown quite a bit. We now have over 90 country partners, as well as over 90 NGO and international organization partners. Our focus is on super pollutants, and so really a lot of the non-CO2 pollutants, and really elevating and advocating for more action on those pollutants within the framework of the Paris Agreement. Through that advocacy, we supported the launch of the Global Methane Pledge at COP26 and have been serving as the Secretariat for the Global Methane Pledge. In order to really bring action on methane into the various different sectors, we started the Technology and Economic Assessment Panel, which really focuses on bridging that knowledge and finance gap around methane mitigation technologies. And next slide, please. And so why are we focusing on methane, and specifically livestock? Since the Industrial Revolution, atmospheric methane has doubled in the past 2 centuries. And about 40% of that anthropogenic increase in methane emissions is from agriculture. And you can see here about 30% of that increase is from the livestock sector. Methane has a short lifetime in the atmosphere compared to other climate pollutants, especially carbon dioxide, and a global warming potential 80 times greater than CO2. And methane lasts only about 12 years in the atmosphere, which means we have an opportunity through urgent reductions in methane emissions to see a cooling impact within our lifetimes, within that 12-year time frame. So with those ambitions, the Global Methane Pledge was launched at COP26 and focused on a global target of 30% reduction from methane emissions, of which about 20 to 25% reduction from the agriculture sector. So recognizing that the fossil fuel sector has a higher burden to lift in terms of the methane reduction potential, but also finding those opportunities in the agriculture sector. If we look at the livestock sector, there are a lot of opportunities to reduce methane emissions intensity as well as absolute emissions through solutions like animal breeding for lower methane emissions, as well as for improved productivity, feeding and nutrition to make sure that livestock are growing at faster rates and producing more milk, animal health to ensure that we have less losses from things like heat stress as well as disease, improved housing for livestock so that they, again, live in more comfortable conditions and improve productivity, as well as manure handling and storage to reduce the emissions from manure. Next slide, please. So with that in mind, we really looked at what are the solutions that exist today that can really help scale these productivity improvements in the livestock sector and reduce losses as well as reduce the methane emissions intensity from livestock. And together with Şeyda Özkan, we authored this report on digital solutions for livestock. And we really wanted to take this a step further, engage more with the stakeholders across the world, and bring together the network that Livestock Data for Decisions brings. And so we're really excited to have this partnership with Livestock Data for Decisions and to be launching this investment roadmap to highlight what are the opportunities for international financial institutions as well as national governments to build the policy frameworks to boost these solutions and allow the private sector to provide that last mile delivery to farmers. So with that, I'll hand it over to Şeyda Özkan to delve more into what some of these specific solutions are and where there are opportunities to scale.
Thank you, Greg. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And in this part of the short introduction, I'd like to tell you a little bit about why digital services or digital technologies can be of relevance when it comes to reducing methane emissions from livestock sector. So digital technologies, in our definition, are coupled with human resources, and they are public extension services, corporate advisory, and farmer know-how. And as you can see in this figure, they can be in different forms, have different scopes, requiring different levels of financial and technical capacities. Next slide, please. The extent to which DSL, digital services for livestock, can support the climate action, and especially through reductions of methane, can be put into 5 different categories. Productivity enhancing tools that improve animal health, reproduction, feeding and nutrition. A second category is greenhouse gas accounting tools that measure, estimate, track greenhouse gas emissions and facilitate and strengthen MRV, through which they can also support national inventory and NDC reporting. weather information services that improve knowledge and ability to anticipate weather, and indirectly also improving feeding management, improving productivity, and supporting climate change adaptation. Animal tracking tools that monitor animal location, health, reproduction, and behavior, as well as to facilitate and strengthen MRV, which also support national inventory and NDC reporting. And finally, market access platforms that connect buyers and sellers in a reliable environment and offer transparent information on input-output prices, incentivizing for improving productivity. Next slide, please. So the DSL and the investment roadmap are of particular relevance to low and middle income countries because there are large disparities between geographies and a variability in emissions intensities that you can see in this map with the countries with the lightest color with emissions intensities of less than 50, and the countries with the darkest colors, representing or having emissions intensities with more than 350 kilograms of CO2 equivalent emissions per kilogram of protein. And this variability is actually offering us opportunities for emission reductions in low and middle income countries with growing food demand. And this can happen by leveraging existing strategies because business as usual risks for loss of efficiency gains. Next slide, please. So we would like to scale up methane mitigation using digital services for livestock because digital services for livestock disseminate tailored advisory services, data, methods, good practices, and market information directly to and among farmers as well as to other stakeholders across the sector. However, they are underutilized and underinvested. And effective advisory services and verifiable data will support low and middle income countries to first improve production efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions intensities, and enhance data and MRV ecosystems to inform climate commitments and monitor progress. Next slide, please. So we developed the investment roadmap, particularly targeting governments and investment sector actors. And in this figure on the right, you can see the 4 pathways of the investment roadmap being building digital public infrastructure for digital services, integrating digital services for the livestock sector into national policies, scaling new service offerings and delivery at the last mile, and mobilizing livestock data ecosystems to enhance MRV. The roadmap aims to provide a systematic approach to DSL investments in these 4 mutually reinforcing pathways. And it also aims to guide investment sector actors and policymakers on the process of integrating DSL into either design projects or existing projects, or it can even offer standalone assessments. It aims to achieve improved tracking of climate and food security outcomes of investments, such as through enhanced capacities, tools, data, MRV, and digital infrastructure. And finally, it aims to increase digital climate finance for the livestock sector, which currently receives only 1 to 2% of the total climate finance that is dedicated to agri-food systems. Next slide, please. So we have 4 foundational recommendations. Establishing a multi-stakeholder steering group that will co-develop a shared DSL action plan, fostering public, private, and other partnerships to be able to access to private sector health data and identify common and pre-competitive challenges. And finally, conduct mapping and analysis of digital operational context and enabling environment. Now I will hand over to Andrew, who will walk us through the 4 pathways. Over to you, Andrew.
Great. Thank you very much, Şeyda, and hello, everybody. So we've heard about the foundational recommendations. I'm now just going to walk us through the 4 different pathways that form the bulk, the body of the work. So these pathways are mutually reinforcing. They can be standalone, but they're also mutually reinforcing and interconnected, and they support the adoption and scaling of digital services for livestock. In any given context, the relative importance of each of the pathways will be determined by that context and also by the priorities of the governments, the project designers, and other key stakeholders involved in making decisions. For each of the pathways, it concludes with a concise set of recommended actions for consideration. So let me go through these one by one now. So we have the first pathway, building digital public infrastructure. So digital public infrastructure provides the foundational building blocks upon which digital services, both public and private, rely. Without DPI, each developer must build all the required architecture to support their own service, and that's costly and inefficient. Examples of DPI include public data sets, such as land use, animal feeds, livestock populations, and registries, such as farm enterprises and vaccination records, as well as non-livestock sector building blocks, such as payment systems. DPI combines open technology standards with robust governance frameworks. Could I have the next slide, please? So the second pathway is integrating digital services for the livestock sector into national policies. Digital services can strengthen the coherence between livestock, climate, and ICT policies and programs. This is particularly the case when linked with capacity building programs. The inclusion of digital services can support data systems and data-driven policies, such as value chain development, greenhouse gas emission inventories, NDCs, and MRV systems. Digital services can also support agricultural extension and animal health and other advisory services and related policy approaches. Next slide, please. The third pathway is mobilizing livestock data ecosystems to enhance measurement, reporting, and verification, MRV. This pathway provides guidance on how digital services can cost-effectively strengthen data collection and improve data flow to support greenhouse gas estimation and help track the impact of mitigation measures. This section highlights the importance of policy, regulatory, and legal frameworks to support data sharing and data protection. Investments to strengthen data systems and credible MRV can also help unlock much-needed climate finance. And the fourth pathway slide, please. So the final pathway is leveraging private sector investment for last-mile delivery. This pathway identifies approaches to catalyze and de-risk private sector investments, particularly those which reach underserved livestock keepers. Options discussed include support for startups and incubators, innovation funds, addressing financing needs, and the role of aggregating models, such as cooperatives and community groups. The pathway also proposes consideration of public-private partnerships and the linkage of DSLs to existing government digital platforms and services, such as social safety net programs. One more, next slide, please. For each of the pathways, we've included a case study using real-world examples drawn from 4 different continents, each of which show how digital services work in practice. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, the roadmap makes the case for investment in digital solutions for livestock, and it identifies potential project design entry points via 4 interconnected pathways. In terms of the next steps, we're actively exploring opportunities to integrate this roadmap into future design processes, and we'll hear more about that later in the webinar. Back to you, Vanessa.
Thanks very much, Andrew and Şeyda. I realized I hadn't properly introduced them. So Andrew Bisson is a senior livestock expert with global experience in program development, and he is also the chair of the LD4D steering committee. And Şeyda Özkan is lead consultant at Livestock Climate Solutions. Okay, we will now introduce our policy panel. As always, we encourage you to put questions and comments in the chat, and our presenters will try to respond during the event. So our panel will be chaired by Shirley Tarawali, who is the Assistant Director General of ILRI, the International Livestock Research Institute, and also a member of the LD4D Steering Committee. Welcome, Shirley. Our other expert panelists are also roadmap co-authors. We have Bernard Kimoro, who is Head of Climate Change and Livestock Sustainability at the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock Development, the Government of Kenya. Welcome, Bernard. We have Ram Dhulipala, Senior Scientist, Digital Agriculture and Innovation, also ILRI, and Greg Kohler, again, Agriculture Expert at CCAC. Over to you, Shirley.
Thanks very much, Vanessa, and welcome everyone to this first panel, which is going to explore a little bit more about the policy dimensions related to digital services for livestock methane reduction in lower middle income countries. As we've heard, there are real opportunities here. Integrating digital services, international policies is both an opportunity to support actions that increase livestock sector productivity while reducing methane emissions, those multi-win opportunities, and at the same time supporting monitoring, reporting and verification systems, data collection, GHG emissions, and thus strengthening the monitoring capacity of countries, which helps them report on GHG emissions for their nationally determined contributions, and then potentially also apply for climate finance. So really great opportunities, solutions, but what about in practice? So we're really pleased to have this diverse panel to bring their different perspectives and explore that a bit. I'm going to ask each of them some questions, encourage you to be brief and where you can connect with others' inputs as well. And as Vanessa's mentioned, if you're online, put your questions and comments in the chat. Hopefully we'll have time at the end to take one or two questions if they've not already been addressed in the chat. Because this panel gives us an opportunity to explore, so what does this mean in practice? How do we turn this into action? As the title says, roadmaps into reality. Connecting policy, e-extension, services, what are the pieces that we need to really make those 4 pathways a reality? So keep adding your comments as the panel is going to explore opportunities, barriers, and levers. So that's enough from me, far by far. Ram, let me turn to you first. And colleagues, I was told I should try and shorten the panel by about 5 minutes, so short responses. Ram, as we've heard, a key ingredient to ensuring these digital solutions will really come to life, as it were, is having sufficient digital public infrastructure. I actually just read something that said the whole of Western Central Africa's at about 40% in that regard. So we have a challenge, but what do you see as key policy levers in that regard?
Yeah, so thank you, Shirley. Thank you for having me on this panel. I think this was briefly touched upon when Andrew was making the presentation, right? So when you speak about digital public infrastructure, this is not just about having hardware or the software. A fair bit of enabling digital public infrastructure comes from suitable governance and policy frameworks, especially around issues of data sharing. A lot of times, a lot of private sector investment to build on top of digital public infrastructure, a lot of times is sort of constrained by absence of very clear-cut policy guidelines as sort of the assurance. Private sector, whenever they make an investment, they always look for policy certainty, they look for assurance. So when you speak in the context of digital public infrastructure, apart from building the necessarily digital core, which is enabling the necessary digital hardware and the software, a fair bit of policy is about policy certainty, especially around policies on data. And as you sort of delve into a DPI way of doing things, issues about interoperability of data, data ownership, data ontologies, these are some very practical and operational issues that start popping up, right? So to me, the real policy levers, coming to a DPI approach are in terms of policy certainty, no knee-jerk reactions to any ad hoc events that governments start messing around with. That's always scares the private sector away. Second, very strong, very well thought out policies around data, including on data ownership, data interoperability, data ontologies. These are some critical policy levers, in my opinion, which, when done well, can crowd in a lot of private sector investments. Thank you.
Thanks, Ram. So when you talk about crowding in private sector investments, tell us just briefly a little bit more about that. What does that look like, as well as what you've just mentioned?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll probably take the example of from India. So again, take an example from the financial inclusion space. For instance, a lot of people know that in India, there's been a history of public sector, especially governments, investing in various DPIs. One is what we call as Aadhaar, which was a national identity platform for all the citizens, and then there is something called as Unified Payment Interface. So these are two massive platforms, national scale platforms or societal scale platforms that have been created by the public sector. But then the end services, right? Like for instance, today, if I want to transfer money from me to someone else, I might be having a bank with a private sector bank. The person I want to transfer money to might be having a bank account with a different private sector bank, right? But today in India, there are a number of privately created mobile payment apps, including Google Pays, Phone Pays of the world, all of them. So I'm able to easily transfer money from one account to another account seamlessly. But the backbone, the backend that's powering this seamless transfer of funds between two completely different private sector operated banks is being facilitated by something like a UPI, right? And India has had some great successes in terms of financial inclusion. So this sort of a DPI intervention is claimed that India's financial inclusion improved from 17% to nearly 83%, which is substantial. So taking inspiration from such efforts, now Government of India is very actively promoting DPI idea, even in the concept of agriculture as well as livestock. So for instance, in India, now what they're trying to do is they're trying to create sort of an animal registry for all the nearly 300 million cattle in India, with the hope that the backend is what is powered and financed by the public sector, but the end services that can be built on top will be from the private sector. So this is sort of a glimpse of a flavor of how you can crowd in private sector investment more into last mile services, whereas the foundational infrastructure is bankrolled by the public sector.
Great example. Thank you so much, Ram. Let me switch to Greg now. And Greg, you framed very well the CCAC and its focus on climate commitments. So what do you see as the policy levers needed to link this digital space to climate commitments? We've said there's real potential here. How do we make it work?
Thank you. Yeah, that's where the rubber hits the road. And so I think one of the biggest challenges with climate commitments and livestock in general is that we're operating in silos. And when we're bringing in digital solutions, we're bringing in new silos. And so you have ministries of environment that handle the climate commitments. You have ministries of agriculture that work directly with livestock producers. And then you have, they have different names, but ministries of information, communication, and technology that are really focused on digital innovation. And so connecting those three ministries can always be a challenge. And so that's where I would start with any kind of approach towards digital solutions for livestock. Really starting that process in the nationally determined contributions, as you already mentioned earlier. I think that's a really key starting point to identify what some of those opportunities are. I think the example that was talked about in the chat about Ethiopia is really interesting, where it's looking at integrated livestock information strategy for the country. And that's really only looking at the productivity improvements and the digital innovation. So there's an opportunity there to bring in the climate opportunity, because this is a low-hanging fruit for the livestock sector to show the opportunities that productivity improvements have for reducing methane emissions intensity. So the emissions per unit of product. per kilogram of milk or per kilogram of meat. And so that's where I would really start, really integrating across those different ministries and bringing in different stakeholders as well through stakeholder consultations. And again, that Ethiopian example is really interesting in terms of all the different partners who came together to shape that strategy.
Great, excellent. And you talked about this sort of siloed problem, if you like, within governments and different ministries, and obviously everybody has a different construct. So what's the strategy for raising awareness with these different pieces that digital services can really help with these MRV systems and thus the potential for climate finance? What do you think works in that regard?
Yeah, I think one of the big opportunities is to highlight the opportunities for innovation and growth. Obviously, digital solutions are something a lot of people are talking about with AI now, for example. It's seen as a huge growth sector. And so that's always an easy starting point to highlight those opportunities. I think when we talk about digital innovation, we don't tend to think about the agriculture sector and especially not the livestock sector. And so I think overcoming some of those biases and stereotypes that we have in society and as policymakers as well, in terms of what sectors are innovative and really showing that there are these opportunities to bring innovation to sectors that are seen as traditional or more long-standing. And there's also opportunities, I would say, to raise awareness around the data collection challenges. When we talk about digital solutions for MRV, we kind of immediately think about data analysis and these calculation tools and so forth. But the real opportunity is on data collection, making sure that we have more data available and higher quality data. And that data can come directly from the farmers. And that's where I think this discussion about digital public infrastructure that RAM has been bringing up is really important, because ensuring that data quality really comes down to having that public infrastructure in place and also making sure that there's interoperability of the data. You know, farmers have a lot of apps that are available to them already. And if they have to input the same data into every app individually, it just becomes a bureaucratic pain for the farmers. And so making sure that that data is interoperable and that there are also clear guidelines in terms of data privacy for the farmers is critical.
Great. Yeah, in fact, Bernard, who I'm going to ask now, and we were at a meeting in Abidjan talking about climate finance for livestock. And one of the things that came out there was, how on earth do you get the information from 500 million smallholder farmers across Africa and Asia, or whoever we're talking about? So Bernard, maybe you'd bring that perspective in. But let me ask you first that same question, Bernard, as I posed to Ram about the policy levers. But let's hear about that from your perspective. What policy levers, Bernard, do you think really could work to help grasp these opportunities to apply digital services here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Shirley, for the opportunity, and thanks everyone for being here. The first thing I want to say is that, and this has already been said by Ram, the importance of policy in ensuring that we create an enabling environment for digital solutions. Greg has also alluded to the fact that although there could be some level of policy environment that is conducive, not many livestock digital solutions have been taken up. So that is an area that I think we need to look at and see how best we can be able to entrench this. Having said that, I just want to say the issue of digital solutions in livestock, whether it is at the policy process level or even the fact that the policies are actually creating what you call the measures, programs and projects, is something that is a continuum. Before we have a policy, we need evidence, which is very critical. And this evidence has to come from what is happening amongst the target groups that we are envisaging, whether it is the farmers. In Kenya, for example, we have 1.8 million smallholder dairy farmers. Globally, you've said the large number of livestock people depend on livestock, over 1 billion, which is a large number. So one of the things that the digital solutions can help us is in the fact that they can enable us, first of all, capture the data. We can actually be able to capture the data from these farmers, from the different programs or projects, and we consolidate this and identify the priority areas for some of these farmers. So in the policy formulation process, this then becomes a very important aspect of the evidence that we require in formulating those policies. More importantly, once you have the policies, then we look at, because the policies are the ones that will actualize the programs and projects in the country. And that again is an issue of evidence. Whether you're looking at developing the climate rationale, for example, or identifying aspects such as the data that is required for setting up baselines, if you're talking about, for example, climate finance, we need to have very clear baselines and also try to demonstrate the mitigation potential for us to have a rationale of investing in some of these activities. So the digital solutions then become very important in that they can be able to help us very fast to capture that data. We can use it to quantify the mitigation potential, for example. That's just one part. And that then gives evidence for climate finance. More importantly, when you go into project implementation, in Africa, we have an aging population. We look at the extension services that has really aging personnel. Then we have to find opportunities of delivering extension and advisory services to the same population that you have talked about. How do we do this? The best option is to identify how we can be able to use the digital solutions, for example, through the e-extension services. And we have programs which are already doing this. These then are able to deliver the messages that we require to provide in terms of the technologies, innovations, and management practices, which can then be implemented. Beyond that, we also have seen digital solutions that provide, for example, support other investments such as risk management in insurance. Index-based livestock insurance is one of the things that we implement in Kenya and the region as a whole. And we are using frontier technologies, basically digital solutions. So it's a whole continuum, which is very critical. Kenya is one of the countries where we have a very strong ecosystem of digital service providers, innovators, and we have very many applications. If you talk about iCow, which is whole extension system, which is covering a large number of farmers, DigiCow, for example, which is very important. So we need to make use of some of this to be able to bridge the information gap which exists and which is necessary for us to be able to provide that evidence, which is critical in supporting the MRV system, which can then also provide us clear targets in the NDC that will then mobilize the climate finance that we actually require. So there are a lot of opportunities that we can see from the digital solutions. Yeah.
So if there's a lot of opportunities and so many different players in the mix, how do we make sure that the transition's really equitable and we don't leave out women or young people or pastoralists? Or we know that sometimes these technologies, off they go at pace, and some segments of society get left out. You've used more than your 3 minutes, so this answer has to be brief.
Very quick. The first thing that I want to say is what Ram said. I mean, the issue of the digital public infrastructure is very critical. How do we make sure that all regions are covered? And we ensure that there's no exclusion of any of these areas. Secondly, how do we come up with the solutions which are comprehensive but use very basic infrastructure? For example, very simple phones where you can use simple USSD messages rather than, smartphones. So those are some of the areas I think we need to see how we can enhance that. Through the IBLI program, of course, there is very simple messaging that provides extension services through short messages, which can actually help the farmers address some of the challenges that they have. So it's possible as long as we have a good environment, that policy environment that creates digital infrastructure, and as well as also enabling innovations to take place on a continuous basis.
And that works for even the most basic technology or whatever. Great, good. Thanks very much, Bernard, and thanks to all three panelists. These were fantastic insights. But we also, I think, have some questions in the chat. And Vanessa, are you going to help me with that? I see there's one for Ram, I think, in particular.
Yep, we can put the first question to Ram, and that's from Titis Abdini. So the question is, do you have an example of well-established policy in LMICs that successfully supports development of digital public infrastructure?
Yeah, I think there are plenty of examples, as I mentioned, quite a few from India, where, especially in the space of financial inclusion, some of the policy levers have been transformational, right? Even take the example of some of the stuff that works on internet, right? A lot of internet, if you really think about it, the internet, which is a network of networks, is also a massive digital public infrastructure, which purely has expanded purely through right policy interventions and aligning your policies to incentives of the people while also safeguarding the rights of potentially of those who would be abused. So I think there are plenty of examples. Might not be readily from the agriculture sector, but that's where we need to learn from other sectors, sort of contextualize it for agriculture. And to refer to Shirley's point, we have to also be very careful, because sometimes some of these interventions, if not designed well, they only will worsen the digital divide. So how can your design itself be, inclusion shouldn't be an afterthought. Inclusion has to be by design, right? So there are some cardinal principles that we need to follow and learn from other sectors.
And maybe we learned from India as well. You gave some good examples from there. Yeah. So sort of cross-country and something learning too.
Yeah.
Vanessa, is there one more?
Yes.
Or we're good?
Yeah, there's one more good question. So Dirk Tepe asks to hear more about strategies for farmer adoption of digital platforms and services. To Greg's point, data capture is ultimately something being asked of farmers to do on their own time, and they need to understand and trust. And we need to understand and trust the data collectors. What role does outreach, trust building, education play in scaling these digital systems on the ground and doing so equitably? And I know, Shirley, you were going to ask a question on that as well.
So we touched on equity with Bernard, but I don't know if any of the panel members want to pick up on any element of that multi-part question. Comment? One of you, Bernard, Greg, please go ahead. Yes.
Just quickly, I think one of the low-hanging fruits is that there's a lot of research that's already being generated by publicly or philanthropic investments, and that research can be made more accessible to both farmers and to policymakers, and really thinking about some of these challenges around interoperability. And so when you're doing research, for example, on breeds and productivity, that's data that can be really useful to farmers and can be brought to farmers through some of these tools. And so thinking together with the private sector, what's the best approach for sharing this public information, and bringing in different partners as well, and really consulting the farmers. And yeah, to Derek's point, it's all about trust and building on some of those networks of trust that have already been established through agricultural research and extension services that exist in their current state is a good starting point.
Great, excellent. Anybody else wanted to comment? Bernard, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment about the strategies for enhancing uptake of digital solutions. I think that's one of the questions that have been asked. How do we create the interest among the farmers? And I want to give an example just to bring this into context. In the Kenyan dairy industry, we have cooperatives as very critical in terms of supporting the marketing of milk. And one of the biggest challenges that we have had in the cooperatives is the fact that it has not been very transparent in terms of capturing this data manually. So the uptake of the digital solutions, we talk about softwares that actually support the cooperatives, and also farm level had software which, or even society level, if digital solutions that support farmers, is that farmers are able to, first of all, when they deliver their milk, they get a document that shows exactly the amount of milk they produced. At the end of the month, they are able to collect the amount because it is digitally captured. Nobody can change that figure. And that has created a transparent mechanism where farmers are benefiting because they're not losing. Nobody is changing the figures that used to happen in the manual systems. So, I mean, we have to look at some of these as some of the examples where we create the interest for the farmers to be able to uptake this. At the same time, using very simple, like I said, short messages, not very complicated, kind of smartphones or anything like that. So that using that and farmers seeing the transparent system that is coming, that creates the interest for them to have an uptake of this. And of course, the other aspect is that getting somebody to come to the farm to treat your animal or even give extension advice can also be quite expensive. So, and even reaching the vet services, it can be quite expensive. An easy way is, how do you map the vet service providers? How can I be able to reach them very fast? Just like on a Uber, when you require transport. So how do I get
Uber
that
for
quickly?
vets, fantastic,
Yeah,
great,
vets, exactly.
very
So
nice.
that's how you interest the farmers to update.
Great. So we've heard about interoperability, the importance of inclusion from the start, the incentives and transparency for farmers, and keeping it simple. And we just mentioned Uber for vets. I think I'm going to need to draw this panel to a close now. And we've heard some really nice, not just policy, but very practical insights and perspectives. But of course, none of these are going to happen without investment, and that investment from multiple sources. And I think the next panel is going to just fix that completely for us. So thanks very much, everyone, and handing over back now. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Bernard.
Thanks very much to our policy panel and to the audience for your excellent questions. We're really pleased to see a lot of chat in the side of the meeting. There's some knowledge exchange happening, phone numbers being exchanged, so that's all very exciting. Without further ado, I will introduce our next panel. This is our investment panel. It will be chaired by Pamela Ruiter, who is the Director of Global Agriculture Methane at the Environmental Defense Fund. We also have Anne Motet, who is Lead Technical Specialist for Livestock at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, Santiago Farinha, Program Officer for Agricultural Livestock at the Global Methane Hub, and Birte Paul, Advisor Agri-Food Systems for GIZ, the German Development Cooperation Agency. So over to you, Pam.
Great. Thank you so much, Vanessa. And thank you to the organizers, CCAC and LD4D, for the opportunity to facilitate this panel. And more importantly, for the opportunity to be a part of the solutions group in the first place. It was a really exciting group to be a part of, and it was a pleasure to work with such an amazing group of people to produce this report. So we've just heard a lot about how important it is that policy creates the enabling environment for digital services for livestock. And we heard about some opportunities and barriers to achieve the correct policies to drive action. Bernard talked about the evidence leading to policy, and I think it's a little bit of like a snowball effect where the evidence leads to better policies. Digital services then also helps provide more evidence to then improve policies, but policies don't put these tools into farmers' hands alone. It's the investment that's needed to drive that action on the ground. So right now in this session, we're going to switch to talk a little bit more about how do we translate actual investment decisions to help these tools reach farmers on the ground. Really quickly, before we jump into the panel, I just want to recap a few points that we heard. The challenge is clear. Livestock productivity in low and middle income countries is going to need to rise to meet growing demand, and we have a chance to bend the emission curves and help the emissions intensity fall to be able to do that. So digital services offer a really great cost-effective way to reach millions of smallholder farmers, increasing capacity to provide public extension services, productivity advice to farmers, weather, market information, but critically also to help generate the kind of data that we need for robust MRV systems and to improve our GHG accounting around livestock as well. So these things, I think, all help put together the pieces that help us unlock climate finance, because the only way that we're going to make this work is if we get these investment decisions done correctly. So the roadmap shows us that by investing in these digital services to enhance productivity, rather than just simply increasing animal numbers, we can bend the emissions curve downward and continue to feed people with hopefully less. To reiterate what Greg said earlier, the success requires coordination across multiple sectors. So from agriculture, environment, finance, technology, and these are sectors that don't normally work together naturally. So this roadmap does help provide a framework for that type of collaboration and to move that forward. So it's not about choosing between development and climate, it's to find ways to support our capacity to achieve both of these things simultaneously. So like I said before, making this work requires smart investment decisions across the entire value chain, from foundational digital infrastructure to last mile delivery that actually reaches smallholder farmers. So I'm really excited for this panel because we are representing different investment actors, from IFIs to philanthropy to development agencies. And these organizations are already making these critical multi-benefit investments work now. And so together they're going to help us answer some of these critical questions that we based around these 4 pathways that we introduced. So how can this roadmap help inform investment decisions? What foundational infrastructure needs public funding to crowd in private investment? What de-risking mechanisms actually work to get these services to underserved farmers? And critically, I think most importantly, how do we move from the roadmap to action on the ground, to making this a reality? So all of the panelists have been introduced. I'm excited to have Anne Motet from IFAD on the panel, Santiago Farinha, Program Officer at the Global Methane Hub, and Bertha Paul from GIZ, who heads the global program catalyzing transformation towards sustainable livestock systems. Let's dive in. I don't want to spend too much time talking. I think we have a lot of great people to provide insights during this panel. So I want to go ahead and dive into some of these questions on how do we really make the practical realities of these investments work. I have some questions built around the 4 pathways, like I mentioned, the ones that Andrew covered earlier to get us started. But please, again, feel free to add any questions that you may have in the comments. And then panelists, there are 3 of us. We have limited time. So like Shirley said too, please keep your responses brief and tight so that we can make sure that everybody has a chance to talk. So I'm going to start off with a question for Anne and for Bertha. I want to hear a little bit more about what your thoughts are on which digital public infrastructure building blocks, such as animal or farm registries or feed databases, do you see as the most important to fund, and why? So I'll kick it over to you first, Anne, since you're the person who I'm seeing on my screen.
Thank you, Pamela. Hi, everyone, and thank you for this invitation. I assume people know about IFAD, but one important thing to know is that we invest in livestock with the governments. So our work is systematically with ministries of agriculture, State Department of Livestock, and we co-invest. So we provide the finance, and the decision making is in the government on how to spend this money with our technical assistance. So that's fundamental to answer your question, Pamela, because that means the public infrastructures are the first thing we look at when we want to develop digital solutions for livestock farmer in a country. In terms of the scope of this within IFAD, it's also important to know that the livestock sector is one of the biggest subsector in agriculture in which we invest in IFAD. we estimated that more than 60% of our projects approved since 2010 include or are focusing exclusively on livestock. So we're almost at the same investment level as World Bank when it comes to the livestock sector. And this means that we're involved in many of those decisions, and it has grown, I would say, this area of digital solution in the past 5 to 10 years. The most important one for us is really around national animal identification and registration systems. So the NIRS, as we usually call it for its acronym. And this is a prerequisite in many of the countries where we work. And in many of those countries, it doesn't exist. And we simply just don't have a robust or reliable animal census in terms of how many animals do we have. And so without this, how can we even talk about vaccination campaigns or greenhouse gas emission to have a whole range of some of the development priorities that we have. So starting with that, it means that we have to design an infrastructure that is flexible, is robust enough to include disease surveillance, but also performance recording, traceability, because a lot of countries are starting to consider trade as well as a priority. But also to be flexible enough to grow, because you never start with a complete picture, and you need to be able to grow the system to, for example, start with cattle, include other species in the long term. So this design is usually requires assistance from outside of the country. So we usually finance the technical assistance coming from a private company or a public-private partnership from another country where this has been done. And the model is I would say replicable, but always adapted locally and always different. So that's the first one, and the priority one for all the development priorities that we have in IFAD. I would say that the second one is also the one that you mentioned when it comes to feed resources, feed database, and it will start with the feed inventory. In many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa and Central Asia, in Latin America where we work, there's simply no feed inventory and feed balance at national and subnational level. But we still invest in developing better feed and fodder, but we usually start in a place where we don't know what is there. We don't have the real characterization of those feed resources. And it's not done in a systematic way by the governments. You can find many scientific projects from CIRAD, from Edinburgh University, from ILRI, that are trying to improve that, or even FAO in different countries, but there's never a real transfer at the end of these projects into government services in charge of feed balances. And even when the institutions exist, for example, if you look at the Sahel, you have the Centre Regional Agreement in Niamey that has a bulletin every 10 days on NPP and biomass productivity during the rainy season. But this is not then consolidated in a national level system. And when the information is transferred in the country, it simply ends up not being really used and useful for farmers. So I would say the second one is very important. And what we see now is that we really need to integrate a very classic balance mechanism of what's available and what are the animal requirements physiologically in energy and protein, and the whole remote sensing information that is becoming more and more available and free, for example, from Sentinel satellite. So we have a wealth of opportunities here, and it's still not really done, and we're investing a lot in that. And maybe to close, and the last one I would say is very important, is the livestock market information systems. So we most of the time we don't have that in the countries where we work. We need simple systems on prices, on requirements, on how many animals are coming to which market, mapping these transactions to be able to invest those infrastructure in the right place. For example, in countries like Rwanda or Tanzania or Uganda, we're investing in setting up live animal markets for farmers to have places to trade their animals, but we have no information on the existing status of those transactions, where they are needed. So this is just simply not known and would be very relevant to improve, for example, animal offtake. So if I have to limit to 3, I would say those 3. Yes, over.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, it's really important points that you make, I think, on having some of that basic data needs met, on having robust and reliable information on like herd numbers and herd health, feed inventories. But I think this last point that you make about the market information systems is really great too, because it's also a value add that can be provided to the farmers themselves. So I think it's one that really shows how this information can flow both ways and be useful for different people across there. Bertha, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure, thanks, Pam. So I'll also start with briefly talking about GIZ. We are not an investor as such in the way, we're obviously not a bank. We are part of the German international corporation. We are the technical assistance arm. So in that sense, of course, we are involved in programmatic or program design decisions, and in that way also investment decisions. So I just wanted to make that clear. So if we talk about digital public infrastructure building blocks, I'll just briefly say a few things from our point of view. So first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge that it was said somewhere in the roadmap, and I think even in this webinar, that they are undervalued and underinvested, underutilized and underinvested, right? And I think most of us in this call will really agree with that. So we are sitting in the same boat, and I think sometimes the reason is, and especially if it comes to digital public infrastructure, is that it's just sometimes very difficult to make it attractive, right? It's a huge enabler, and probably many of us agree with that. It's really needed. Good evidence and the good data is needed for the good policies. The good policies are needed for the investments, etc., etc. But it's just not something very attractive to sell in many ways. So that has been a hurdle even for us in programmatic decisions that we take. So I would just underline, I don't want to go into all kinds of different, it's hard to say which ones are important, which ones are not. Definitely many of those are important, but I would just underline one issue, and Anne also mentioned it, which is traceability. So tracking animals and traceability of animals. It's not a new topic. I think in Latin America, definitely it's more developed. In a lot of African countries, so we see a lot of demand and interest in that. As part of the German corporation, we also work very closely with the governments of our partner countries. And in that way, I have the privilege to speak to a lot of our colleagues. And for example, I saw various colleagues from the Ministry of Livestock from Nigeria with whom we collaborate very closely. And it's an issue that is brought to our attention various times, for example, in Nigeria. So traceability, not as tracing animals not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end, right? Because it can help you improving tracking animals and therefore improving animal health. It can help you track the genetics and therefore improve the genetic quality of your herd. But then also for environmental issues that are becoming more and more important, it helps to have traceability systems. So I know that a lot of countries are looking for technical support and also investments in really bringing their animal traceability systems to the next level.
Great, thank you so much. I want to pick up on something that Anne said earlier when you were talking about public-private partnerships and touch a little bit on that, because I think that's another piece to add on, because Bertha, like you said, we have different kinds of investors, not directly just IFIs. We have IFAD, we have you guys as a development agency, and we have Santiago representing philanthropy. So it's different types of investment. I think we need all of them to come together to make it work. And I wanted to ask around the public-private partnerships piece. Santiago, I'll pass it over to you to have you open up that question. And then Anne, also, I'll have you answer that question. And Bertha, of course, if you have any examples that you think might be interesting, you can feel free to add. But the question is what types of public-private partnerships have been successful at getting digital livestock services to farmers? So are there examples in the work that you've done that you'd like to highlight of some really great public-private partnerships in this space that you can share with the group? Santiago, go ahead.
Thanks, hi everyone. So yeah, it's really hard to find like successful public-private partnerships, and so now I'm sitting in that philanthropy world with the Global Methane Hub, which is a recent organization, only has 3 years, but my experience also comes from working in National Research Agriculture Institute in Uruguay and the private sector in Argentina. So being in both sides of the coin, like I think the most successful cases were always and the most sustainable ones, I think, were the ones that we had a bottom-up approach, and the key has always been trust. Trust between people, organizations, and also in tools and data. So I think the 3 aspects of successful cases. First is to start focusing. And probably it'll be focusing what we call decision support tools, which are one of in the roadmap, it was like highlighted as the productivity enhancement tools, which are connected to greenhouse gas measurement tools, but it's really focused on productivity to bend the curve of emissions. So the first aspect is to focus on a need. So not to focus on the solution to a problem that the farmer has, not to a solution to a problem we bring. And that's a very simple but very important aspect that sometimes we overlook. So we look at the problems that farmers have, and most of the times are related to profitability and livelihood. So earning more money, or at least earning some money, and also making their lives simpler and better. So in that case, it's in a recent experience of working on feed solutions, animal health and welfare, and grazing decision making as data, for example, and we can tell more about that later. The other aspect is involving users in the development of the solutions. So it's very hard to really adjust your solutions and be having them adopted, and there's a lot of talk about that earlier, if we don't involve the users. So people that work in the technology now have that very clear, and they have that user experience design approach, user-centered design approach, and that's what we have to have in agriculture, and we're not very used to that. And we developing now projects like the time to graze, which is taking, and was mentioned in the Sentinel tool. So we're taking remote sensing, new technologies, but we're investing on the development of decision support tools to use that in the language, and also in the experience, giving the user experience that farmers or decision makers need in that aspect. And the third aspect is really working with cutting-edge technology in tool design and pipeline for development. So again, I was today talking about apps in India, in Africa, and we can see that from our own experience as people. Like our screen time, it's very competitive. So there's a lot of apps that are competing for time in the screen, and that's not going to come with just, well, I come from the research world, and we are not the best at developing that kind of solution. So we really need to work with organizations. So an example of that in Global Methane Hub has been the feed ration formulation project, where we coupled with Digital Green, which is an example. It's not the only one, but that is really working on cutting-edge technologies or in terms of user experience. And so the LD4D, this platform, I think, is a great place to meet those providers of solutions and experiences across the globe.
Yeah, I'm not going to add a lot to to this, because Santiago has already said a lot of what is also true for IFAD. Maybe to structure it from the IFI and public development perspective, you basically have 2 cases on how we engage also with the private sector. So in many countries we bring in, for example, private veterinarians and animal health services providers, or small digital company to develop solutions within a sovereign operation, with specific, procurement processes and so on. They need to tender. They need to have a good commercial and financial offer, because it's a public market basically. But the discussion and the technical understanding can help also the offer to really match the needs. So we did that, for example, in Pakistan, in Punjab, with a project that was delivering a digital solution to 50,000 women livestock farmers, or in Indonesia with veterinarians. So we have many cases like this where we facilitate. I mean, the technical facilitation helps an offer from a private service provider to the government to really match the needs. But there's another case that is maybe this more bottom up that Santiago was referring to. So I don't know if any of you in the webinar are familiar with a company in Uganda that's called Emata, that is providing digitalization for meat collection centers in Uganda, and that is basically working hand in hand with the Dairy Development Authority, so basically the Dairy Board of Uganda, which is a public institution. So it's not this company is not financed by the government, nor does it answer a call from the government financed by IFAD, but it's partnering directly with the authorities to facilitate access for those meat collection centers to digital record keeping, and many other access to finance also through this. It's basically a fintech. So it can be through tenders, call for proposals, but it can also be through facilitation of basically a public institution and a private institution co-benefiting from working together without having any investments in place. And this is also as part of larger development project that we can facilitate that. So there are different ways of facilitating this. And I have to say that the second one is probably the biggest value for money, but it's probably more difficult because we don't always have an actual mapping of the solutions available to facilitate them. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, that's something that we hear a lot too. And I think I'm hearing from you guys that even though this is a huge enabler and we need to make it attractive and needs to work across sectors, one of the key sectors to work with is the producing sector themselves and the farmers, and make sure that whatever we're doing is giving a value add to them, not just us extracting some of the information that we might need. So it's a difficult and complex space to collaborate and find those needs, is what I'm hearing highlighted here. Bertha, did you want to add anything to that? Or should I move to the next one?
Not really. I would like to add something to a point in the chat, if I can.
Sure. If you want to, go ahead, and then I can move on to the next question. Yeah.
Quick one, because I opened the topic of animal identification and traceability. And it's being mentioned that, the benefit to the farm, what's the incentive to farmers of recording accurate information or sharing it? I fully agree, and I guess it's the biggest issue in traceability. I mean, trust, because you can say there's a lack of incentive. There can even be a disincentive to provide accurate data, right? Especially maybe where there are issues with, more data can also provide avenues for more accurate taxation that people might not be incentivized to provide, etc., right? So it's a main thing to work on. So it is also it's an inclusive policy issue also. It's not just a technical issue. And I guess that's also a point that I wanted to make in general about roadmap. I mean, the roadmap can provide very good inspiration for program development and investment. It can provide ideas, but of course, when you go down to the ground, you need very concrete examples. You need very concrete technical expertise. And it's seldomly just a technical issue of just deploying some kind of data collection system and database, right? It's not a technical issue. It's really an issue of a broad inclusive policy development. What is the wider benefit to smallholder farmers of traceability? I guess if it can provide very clear avenues for example, entering new markets that provide certain animal health specifications that otherwise cannot be provided. That could be one example, right? Or it can gain you access to a premium market segment because you can prove the origin of the product, etc., right? But that needs to be very clear to the ones that we want to participate and also benefit from that intervention.
Thank you, Bertha. I wanted to look at something. There was a question in the audience in the previous session also that was really interesting to bring up to this group as well. And the question was from Ian Wright that was talking about investment. And the question was, what do we know about the return to investment by both private and public sources in digital service for livestock for methane reduction? This could be a financial return, reduction in methane emissions, or other indicators. Are there data from some of the case studies that were mentioned? So I can start with that. There's still an evidence base that's emerging around this topic, but there are strong indicators that they're highlighted in those case studies. It looks at the DAIMA program and how it projects a reduction of over 2 million tons in CO2 emissions in over 20 years. And so alongside with productivity gains, the Stell Labs example in India has also talked about how it's scaling to over 3 million producers and with the amount of investment that it needs. So I want to hear from you guys. It's a little bit of a combination of a question that I had before, but what is the additional evidence that would give you confidence to invest that digital services could provide? How do we build that evidence base while scaling? So how can this roadmap help your teams make better investment decisions on digital livestock services? And are there pathways that you find particularly useful? And I'll open up to all of you guys on some ideas there. I think that's a question that everybody can answer a little bit. Bertha, since you're on the screen and I know that you might have to leave a little bit early, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Pam. So I think, but I mentioned one way in the previous in the previous point I made. We continuously develop programs, right? It's on a rolling basis across the globe. So there are various points in the whole program development cycle where inspiration comes in well, and I can just confirm the challenge that we see even from our point of view, that it's sometimes very hard to motivate investment in livestock because of the various challenges that we all know about, right? So these kind of products can really help like inspire and show like there's a coalition of people who believe in it and who can actually provide concrete examples. So that's one thing I mentioned, and I think that is, if I look at the policy pathways, moving from, we talked about that earlier, it's sometimes a very long way going from the better data to the better policy to the better, like showing the impact to then leveraging the finance. And the finance is where everybody wants to go, because obviously any good policy doesn't help you go anywhere if you don't have finance to actually implement those strategies, right? So this is where we all want to go. So I think in terms of really providing good examples and also identifying where expertise lies for all of us to come from. And I just want to highlight again the example of Nigeria with I think the Ministry of Livestock is 1 year old, with a technical working group that is tasked with mainstreaming climate change into the ministry and inviting international partnerships to come in and really support that. And there's a current effort going on, for example, to establish a methane baseline. Similar issue in Zambia, where the current livestock policy is ending, I think next year, and it's awaiting renewal, or like a next phase of the livestock policy. So there are these kind of windows of opportunity, I guess, in many countries, and they're not always there. And what can we learn from, for example, Kenya, Netherlands, Uruguay, whatever, in really coming in there? So that's something I really take from the roadmap.
Great, thank you so much. Anne, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks. Maybe I'll be a bit controversial here, because I see a lot of comments in the chat that smartphones are found everywhere and farmers have access now. I agree that it's the case in many parts of Africa, but there are still quite a few countries where farmers don't have access to digital technologies. And even if you go to the field, you won't find a signal. We have large investments in livestock, for example, in Tajikistan, in Bolivia, very mountainous areas with remote communities, zero signal, zero smartphone. So we need to adapt to these realities as well. They're not as visible because they're not digital, but we're also thinking about solutions that can be delivered in the absence of that level of technology that we can find, for example, in Kenya. Kenya is a precursor, I think. It was a trendsetter when it comes to mobile payment, for example. It was really inspiring. Before COVID, they were the #1 countries in terms of volumes of mobile payments, even far ahead from Europe. So this is not the case everywhere. So we need also very simple solutions, and this is something we include when we can, that are, SMS based or groups, forming groups through which farmers have access to technology on an organized way. So it's not only, we cannot assume that the actual service is available already at the same level everywhere, especially when it comes to livestock. But this being said, I think you mentioned Daima in your intro to the question. It's also for us those digital solutions when they come to greenhouse gas emission. They're certainly not the objective for the farmers. We're not looking at solutions for farmers to reduce their emissions. That's not their #1 motivation. It's really for our financing partners. If we want to, and Birte mentioned that, if we want to make sure that we need first to continue investing in the sector if we want to make it more climate friendly, I would say. It will go the other way around if we stop investing. It will not stop growing. It would just not grow in a way that is climate friendly. But to be able to maintain and enhance these investment levels, we need to prove that that we have an impact, and I believe this is also of critical importance for IFIs and other partners to be able to rely on those solutions, but in a way that it cannot be an infinite number of solutions that everyone would pick their own. It needs to be a bit harmonized. It needs to be a bit certified if possible, to build the trust. Because we could all come with our own way of calculating our emissions, and if it's not in a harmonized or verified way, we will not build the trust that we need. So I think there's also a lot of work to do on this harmonization. Over.
Thank you so much, Anne. I agree. I think it's just another point to underline how important the collaboration piece is, and I think what we feed out of these systems is really important. It's not just data for data's sake, it's data for a purpose. And to be able to have that purpose, the harmonization piece, I think, is really important so that we can have workable information that we can use to both extract and reinforce investments in this space, but also for the farmers and producers to be able to have reliable information to use for their own decision making. And it's kind of how that information is harmonized and how it flows in both directions. Santiago, I'm going to pass it over to you to add to that, but I also want to add just a specific question for you since you're coming at this from a different perspective. So not only how can elements in this roadmap help your team make better investment decisions in general and on digital livestock services, but specifically from the role of philanthropies funding in this space, how do you think philanthropies can play this catalytic role to help crowd in investment from private and public sector as well?
Thanks, Anne. And yeah, I think it relates a lot to the conversation just before on return on investment. I think we feel the responsibility, even when focusing on methane, that to fund the technologies or the areas that have known sponsors. No, so I mean, I'm talking about the technologies that are process-based, that there's no one that's getting a commercial benefit from selling them. So there's no input involved. So then, and there's still in the global south, there's so much in the farming livestock sector that can be achieved in terms of productivity improvement based on improved management that are attached to technologies, but they're not necessarily technologies that are input-based or equipment-based. So the return on investment is the key return on investment we're looking for is the return on investment of time or little money of the farmer, not the return on investment for the developers. So we don't need to make a business for the developers or the companies that can support technology. It will be in time, but our focus is making sure that the technologies are having a profitable impact on farmers, a single farmers or a group of farmers. So we're talking about, again, grazing management for that can ensure regrowth, recovery, and better intake and disability. So that has a productivity impact, or heat stress, like simple access to shade can increase 50% meat production. So for that, we need demonstration. We need, like Bernard was talking about, evidence. So we need evidence on the ground and MOV attached to that, because to the third point that I had on that is that we want to work with the other guys here, the AFIs, the IFAD, the World Bank, and we are working with them. But they need to see on the ground what's happening, and they need numbers. They need to see, what are the numbers, what is the real benefit of the intervention of technologies. So that is, I think, part of it is what we are doing, and the samples in Argentina, Paraguay, Bolivia, in the state of Pará in Brazil, the state of Maharashtra in India, where we're trying to focus on those technologies, but with a real on-the-ground demonstration, particularly with farmers that are influential, farmers that are seen by other farmers and looked at, and with strong MRV, trying to be able to make a case for, connect to the portfolios of the international finance organizations to be able to scale. So philanthropies can catalyze, but we need to work with others to scale.
Great. Thank you guys so much for all of your incredible insights. Again, I'm hearing collaboration is key. I'm going to pass it back over to Anna and to Greg to close out the session, since I know that we just have about 5 minutes left. But thank you guys so much. Thank you, Anne, Bertha, and Santiago, for your great insights.
Thank you, Pam, and thank you for everyone in the investment panel and from all of our panelists today. It was really wonderful to see so much engagement, both from the panel discussions and in the chat. Really wonderful to have so much enthusiasm around this, and seeing all of the different country and project examples that have come up in the chat. We've learned a lot from this webinar, which I think is unusual. It's been much more active and engaging than your typical webinar. And so we're really excited to have had so much engagement from all of you. And we'll definitely be following up after the webinar to continue this momentum on this topic. And yeah, so on behalf of CCAC, thank you, everyone. And I'll pass it to Anna if you have any final reflections from LD4D side.
Thank you, Greg. So thank you, everyone, and special thanks to our panelists and our solutions groups member, because we are all here because of your efforts. So we have this little survey that you can complete if you're interested in exploring a partnership around the roadmap. We will share the recording of the event with all of you. And if you're interested in getting in touch with any of our panelists and speakers, please get in touch with us first and we'll connect you. Next slide, please, Vanessa. These are all the ways that you can get involved with LD4D. So it would be great if you guys could get in touch with us via one of these channels. We have an annual meeting coming up on the 4th of December. We'll be announcing that very soon. It'll also be a really good opportunity to engage with us. I hope I can see you all there. This is all from me. Thank you very much, and we'll keep in touch.